Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing with chapter 6 of this volume 3 of the Luang Por Sumedho anthology called The Direct Realization, and this talk is called The Five Khandhas. And once again, this was given during the winter retreat of 1988. The mental khandhas also operate on that same principle. Though prior to this, he was talking about rupa, the first of the five khandhas, the quality of material form, and then the way that the mind experiences that, perceives that. So often you have the five khandhas divided into a more simplified version of two qualities, nama and rupa. Nama being the mental khandhas. So that's feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, and then rupa. So sometimes the five khandhas are just called nama rupa, and sometimes the five khandhas. So rupa khandha is known as the aspect of form, and the other four are often grouped together as the nama khandhas, or the mental group, or the mental aggregates. The mental khandhas also operate on that same principle. Vedana is a mental state, the feeling you have of attraction and aversion to the physical things that you hear, see, smell, taste, touch. The sensation of pain is just as it is, but then there's a reaction of liking or disliking, or not even that, but just a moving towards or away from it. You can be aware of feelings, moods. Note the heat that comes from anger, the dullness that comes from doubt and sloth and torpor. Note the feeling when you're jealous. You can witness that feeling. Watch instead of trying to annihilate jealousy. When jealousy conditions your mind, begin to reflect on it rather than reacting to it or trying to get rid of it because you don't like it. When you're cold, what is coldness? Do you like it? This coldness, feeling cold, is that something terribly unpleasant, or do you just make a lot out of it? Hunger. What is hunger like? When you're feeling hungry, meditate on that physical feeling to which you tend to react by trying to get something to eat. Or meditate on the feeling of being alone or separate, the feeling that people look down on you. If you feel, I don't like you, meditate on that feeling. Or if you feel that you don't like me, meditate on that, exclamation mark. Bring this into consciousness now, but not analytically, trying to figure out whether I really do like you or whether your relationship to me is dependent, childlike relationship that you shouldn't have, or getting caught up in Freudian psychology or whatever. Just observe the doubting, uncertain state of mind in your relationships to others, not to analyze, but just to observe the feelings of confidence or lack of confidence, aversion or attraction. That is vedana. This is a natural thing. We're all sensitive beings, so attraction and repulsion are operating all the time. They're conditions in nature, not a personal problem unless we make it so. In Luang Por's description of Vedana here, then as we were saying with respect to the way the five khandhas operate and overlap and sort of are interrelated, was part of the reading yesterday. Similarly, Luang Por's speaking about Vedana here, and the English word feeling tends to incorporate both the quality of sensation, say a simple and very say tangible quality of feeling, all the way through to complex emotional states and attitudes. So our English word feeling covers a big range. So in many respects, the word vedana is more accurate to translate as sensation. And it's say the simple quality of sukha vedana, dukkha vedana, adukkama sukha vedana, painful feeling, pleasant feeling, and feeling which is neither painful nor pleasant. So technically speaking, I think sensation is a better word for translating vedana, although it's very sort of common and almost automatic to be rendering it as feeling. But also what Luang Por is describing here is using vedana or taking the quality of vedana as a way of exploring emotional states. So in a way, using vedana, the sensation, as the access to the more complex qualities of emotion and attitude and such like, which would be broadly under the category of sankhara, of those mental formations like emotions, attitudes and such like. That would be in the sankhara khandha, in the sort of normal understanding or the use of the words. So, but I feel that this is a very helpful pattern of approach and a particular meditation method that Luang Por would teach, and I seem to remember him going through a number of times during this period of the late 80s and teaching on these themes would be, and it was touched on in one or two of the earlier readings, whereby you're deliberately bringing up an emotional state. You're consciously conjuring up a memory or an idea, thinking of somebody that you're jealous of, or bringing up something that you are. So that you're worried about, like Ajahn Sumedho hates me, or I hate Ajahn Sumedho, or Ajahn Amaro, if that's the case. And so then using some way of triggering an emotional state, fear or desire, attachment, aversion, wherever you have a particular area of mental habit that you want to understand or get to know more acutely. And so then, say, bringing the mind to a quality of quietness, deliberately inviting that state to come into being, so that conjuring up jealousy or fear or desire or aversion. And then the trick of this kind of practice is, after that emotional state has been triggered, has been sort of ignited, then to take the attention off the particular person that you love or you hate, or the particular memory that you feel regretful about, or a feeling of grief or sadness, whatever it might be, to take the attention off the story, off the mental imagery of that person or that event, and to bring it into the area of physical sensation. And as Luang Por is saying here, you can witness that feeling. Instead of trying to annihilate jealousy, when jealousy conditions your mind, begin to reflect on it rather than reacting to it. Try to get rid of it. When you're cold, what is coldness? So you're bringing your attention, say, okay, where do I feel the physical sensations that go along with jealousy? Where are those felt? Are they in my neck or in my shoulders? Is there a kind of vibration in my fingers? Is there a quality of tightness or heaviness or heat or cold, or what's there? And that for most people with most emotional states, if you look, you can find there's some kind of physical sensation, some kind of vedana. There's some sort of resonance in the body that comes with every kind of emotional state, and whether it's something that has a valid source or not, whether it's a real issue in your life that that monk really is angry with you, and that when you think of him you feel afraid. It's like that that's not something that the mind is just inventing, but it's got a basis in an event that happened earlier in that day, say, or whether or not it's just something that the mind is imagining, or whether it's got a true basis. The point is, this is what fear feels like, and you can look at that sensation, you can feel it, know it, fully cognize that, and that the great benefit of this practice. Now, I've done a lot of this in the past, particularly around fear and anxiety, is that you get to know that this is just a natural, say, a feature of the natural landscape. That we have a mind, we have a body, we can experience fear, we can experience desire, we can experience regret or anger. And so that it's almost like in that moment there's a getting to know the quality of anger or fear or jealousy. It's like this. This is the tone or the texture of it. And that in that seeing it, feeling it, knowing it in that way, then the mind is able to see that this is part of nature. It's being experienced with a nature-centered perspective rather than a self-centered one, because the habit of the mind is to get wrapped up in the stories of what I should have said and what I did say and what he said and what she's like and what it's going to be like in the future. It creates a lot of personalizing resonances around that feeling. But at its root, here is the feeling of anger. It's like this. Here's the feeling of grief. It's like this. This is the feeling of anxiety. It's like this. And the more that say physical sensation can be known and received and acknowledged, just as part of a natural flow of experience, then the attitude towards it changes, and it's much easier to understand it, to know it, to let go of it, and to not feed the habit of identification with it. So there's a lot around this sort of mindfulness of feeling, of vedana, of sensation, and so you're not trying to convince yourself that there aren't more complicated psychological issues as well. You know, looking at Luang Por Sumedho or myself as a father figure, or your own regrets about painful things that have happened in your life and things that need to be worked out in your own family. Yeah, those things can be part of it too. That there are genuine, patterns of conditioning that have their effect. But with this kind of a practice, it's sort of in a way putting that analytical aspect of it aside, and just say, well, that may well have a big effect and be part of the picture, and why I relate to having being in a position of authority has this effect, or experiencing authority from outside has that effect. But in this moment, it feels like this, and this is what feeling intimidated or feeling bossy is like. It's this way, and this is part of the human landscape that is being experienced and being known, and so that is, I found, an extremely skillful way of using the meditation, and also helping to get a very clear perspective upon the emotional reactive patterns that our minds tend to get lost in. You know, things that are loved, things that are hated, things that are owned, things that are lost, and so on and so forth. To continue then. Sanya khandha is the perception khandha. To grasp a perception means to believe in the way things appear in the present as if they have a kind of permanent quality. That's how we tend to operate in our lives. So I might think, for example, that a particular monk is this way. It's a perception I have whether I'm sitting next to him or I'm alone, whether he's helping me or he's angry with me. I have this fixed view. A fixed perception is not all that conscious, but I tend to operate from that particular fixed position if I believe in my perception. And when I think of him in that way, it's as if his personality is fixed and constant, rather than being the way it is at this time. My perception of him is just a perception of the moment. It's not a soul that carries through time, not a fixed personality. So sanya is to be meditated on. Khandhas are mental formations. There are perceptions of the mind, sanya, and on the basis of them are our mental activities, sankhara. So the assumptions that you have about yourself from childhood, parents, teachers, friends, relatives, and whether you perceive yourself as good and positive, or in a negative way, or a confused way, all that is the sanya sankhara khandhas. Memories come up, or fears about what you might be lacking. You can worry that there might be a serious flaw in your character, or that some horrible repressed desires might be lurking way down deep in your mind, which might come up in meditation and drive you crazy. That's another mental condition, not knowing what we are, so that sometimes we imagine the worst possible things. But what we can know is that whatever we believe ourselves to be is a condition of the mind. It arises, it passes away, it's impermanent. If we come from certain fixed perceptions of ourselves, we conceive all kinds of things. If you operate from the position, quote, I am a man, unquote, you assume that perception of yourself is what you are. So you never investigate that perception. You just believe that you're a man, and then conceive manhood as being a certain way, what a man should be. Then you compare yourself to what the ideal for manhood is, and if you don't live up to those high standards of manhood, you worry. Something's wrong. You start feeling upset or guilty, or hating yourself because of your basic assumption that you're a man. On a conventional level, this might be true. Men are this way, women are that way. We're not denying the conventional reality, but we're no longer attaching to it as a personal quality, a fixed position to take at all times and in all places. This is a way of freeing ourselves from that quality of being bound to unsatisfactory conditions. If you believe in being a man or a woman as your true identity and your soul, that belief will always take you to a depressing state of mind. All these are perceptions we have. We create so much misery over perceiving ourselves to be black or white, or members of a certain nationality or class. In England, people suffer because of their perception of belonging to a certain class. In America, we suffer from not having any perceptions of class, from the perception that we're all the same, we're all equal. It's the attachment to any of these, even to the highest, most egalitarian perception, that takes us to despair. So the theme here, again, is how we create ourselves. A few days ago, we were talking about not creating people and how we tend to create ourselves, create other people. And I think it was a question from Maureen that was asking about how to not create others, not to say reify or make it something real and solid. And that this is a particular theme that is Luang Por is emphasizing here. It's a lot to do with perception. That I perceive, oh, this person is like this, that person is like that, and then we create the person. We have a particular set of images. We don't, and as he said, we don't do it consciously. We don't realize we're doing it, so it seems real and valid. Well, he is like that. He has got a problem with me. He's always finding fault with me, and. So whenever I think of him, then of course I'm thinking of how he complains about me, because he complains about me all the time. That kind of thing. I'm just making this up, but we don't even consider that. Oh well, is that perhaps just a story I'm telling myself? Yes, that person has expressed a complaint, but is that who and what they are in an absolute sense? Is that the whole story? Or is that just what my mind is hanging on to? So this theme of noticing how we create other people, and you're not trying to pretend that there aren't particular qualities, like say that you have a memory of some monk, coming to you and complaining about something to do with your conduct or your attitude, and okay, that interaction did happen, but what is the way that the mind is filling in the blanks or making that as a solid and complete picture? That that's what that person is. They are completely and utterly the complainer. That's what they are. There's nothing else. They've got no parents. They've got no background. They haven't got a nationality or an age or a story. They're just that monk who complains about me, and that it's ridiculous when you spell it out. But this is what our mind habit of attachment to perception does. We create each other, we typecast each other, and then we tend to live with those creations, those ways that we've formed each other, and we don't see anything beyond that. We can limit the range of appreciation of other beings to our set of assumptions and judgments, and that just being able to reflect on that, to spell it the way it's spelled out like this, and then to be considering that using wise reflection, yoniso manasikara, to say, well, how could that be? Is that really the whole story? Or yes, that's what my mind says about this person, or it says about myself. Self-creation is as much of an issue as creation of others. So to use that quality of wise reflection, and also the simple practice that Luang Por Chah would encourage, just asking the question, is that so? When you find yourself praising somebody or criticizing somebody, or just to ask the question, is that so? This person's really wonderful. Is that so? This person's really awful. Is that so? I really need to have this. Is that so? I can't stand that. Is that so? And that simple way of bringing attention to a judgment and then expanding the field of attention around it, just in that extremely simple, plain, direct question: is that so? That when that's done with an attitude of mindfulness and care, it's a caring attention, not just sort of sort of semi-consciously, automatically repeating the question, but really asking it, applying that. Is that so? Then that taps into our intuitive wisdom, that quality of satipanya that knows on a non-conceptual, non-personal level, oh, of course, that can't be the whole story. I'm ignoring the fact this person has a background, they have an age, they have a family they've come from, they have the reasons that brought them to this monastery in the first place, that they have a whole range of different influences that are there, that are part of what they are, and my mind is editing all of that out, just focusing on this one particular characteristic of their life, or what has formed a way of interacting with them. So that in this, as Luang Por goes on to say explore, if you operate from the position of I am a man, that in terms of self-creation, we make these sort of automatic assumptions, or that that are backed up by our conventions of I am a man, I'm a monk, so I sit on this side of the temple, I have a male body, therefore I am a man. If you're a woman, you sit on this side of the temple, you have a woman's female body, and that on a conventional level, those characteristics are there, those definitions are part of the picture. But it's also in exactly the same way, it's bringing with it a whole set of assumptions of what that means, or taking that to be exactly who and what you are, and that the perceptions around I am and the identification process is kind of ignored or is not appreciated. And as Luang Por points out here, if you believe in being a man or a woman as your true identity and your soul, that belief will always take you to a depressing state of mind. And one of the comments that Luang Por would often repeat in this era would be, whenever I think about myself, I feel depressed, which some people took as a major psychological flaw on his part. But it's a very profound Dhammic statement, I would say, is that because it reflects the effect of self-conception, what's called manyati. The word mana means conceit, manyati is to conceive. So it's saying any kind of I-making and mind-making necessarily brings dukkha. That's an automatic result of that. If the mind believes in the I am, in any way, shape, or form, right there is a cause for dukkha. And in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, Sutta number 140 in the Majjhima Nikaya, when the Buddha talks about this conceiving, manyati, in a bit of detail, and he says, I am is a conceiving, I am not is a conceiving, I used to be is a conceiving, I shall be is a conceiving, and conceiving is like a poisoned arrow. It's like a cancerous tumor. It's an affliction. It's alien. It's distressing. So he speaks about it in quite sort of punchy terms in that sutra in particular, but similarly in other places. And I feel that it's helpful to recognize. So when Luang Por said, whenever I think about myself, I feel depressed. It's like, as soon as the mind creates an I am, it invests in that sense of being or owning, or takes your own story to be absolutely true and real. There's dukkha that comes with that, and it's when the mind lets go of that conceiving, that manyati, it stops that making that I, me, mine feeling solid, and recognizes that any sense of I or you, it can only be a convenient fiction. It's intrinsically transparent, empty of substance. Then that there's no dukkha being caused. The mind is not creating the causes for dukkha, and that. And in that same sutta, when the Buddha says, when the heart is free of that kind of conceiving, this is called being a sage at peace, and one is not born. It's one of the places where he uses birth in very, very obviously clearly in a psychological sense. One who is who's let go of that conceiving of I am. They're not born. Not being born, they're not agitated. Their heart is free. Their heart realizes nibbana here and now, and so that it's very helpful to think. Even if you're thinking about yourself or looking at yourself with an intention of trying to understand the workings of your own psychology, and to be exploring that, to seeing and to see more clearly why you react by worrying about this or obsessing about that, or being irritated by this, or feeling a sense of ownership with respect to that. That as we might explore or reflect upon our own particular sets of conditioning, it's helpful to recognize that when we say I am, or this is my personality, or this is my background, there's a kind of a way that the mind is holding that as well. When I say I am, that is only a convenient fiction. That's a mode of expression. It's not a fixed and independent being that I am, that is totally separate and independent of all other beings, all other aspects of the natural order, so that it's there can be a value in looking at our own conditioning, what excites us, what worries us, what irritates us, what makes us feel insecure, and so on. There can be a value in exploring and using wise reflection to look at that conditioning, but if that is done, then it's most important that any of the I ams, the I making and mind making around that is recognized as being intrinsically empty, transparent, and not really completely who and what we are. So, any thoughts, questions, reflections on this part of the teaching? Don't be shy. Yes, Anagarika, Michael, please.
I read a Christian monk, I can't remember his name or the tradition, but he was talking about...
His name was what?
I can't remember the name or the tradition. He was talking about a similar type of thing that what might have come out of the Sutta 140 kind of practice of not conceiving a self, and so he was talking about bracketing, like he used the word bracketing as a term for spending time in that state, and then at some point just kind of saying, okay, now whatever the other mode of operating is, needs to have its usual form after a while, before moving back to a space of not conceiving a self. And I wondered if you had experience of conceiving that type of practice in that way, or if it's useful.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it in exactly those words, but I can relate to what that means, bracketing, in terms of say the conscious picking up of the personality and having to sort of be someone. And again, as I was mentioning a few days ago in one of the readings, the word person comes from the Latin persona, which means a mask. Per means through, sona is sound, so persona is they would use in Greek and Roman theatre, the mask that the actors would talk through. So right there in the word, there's the image of sort of putting on the person, and it's a performance, And it's kind of interesting how the words practice and performance relate to each other. That we're practiced like an actor practices their lines or practices the scenes, and so that they can perform. They can get on the stage and they can perform that role. So that that sort of that relationship, what you're talking about in terms of bracketing, it's I feel it's a similar thing to consciously putting on the mask and say taking up the role. Like in my kuti, as I often say, like in my kuti, I'm not Ajahn Amaro. If there's no one else around, there's just this. And then when somebody comes to visit, or I come out and sit here in a chair with a Dhamma book and a microphone and a camera, then the Ajahn Amaro persona is operating. You do that with as much sincerity and honesty, but it is a persona. When I go back to my kuti or I walk out the temple, I don't have to be Ajahn Amaro anymore. It's I'm not anything else in particular, but it's just a role, a form that's appropriate to that time and place and situation. And that sense, particularly in relationship to the formal practice, and I, for myself, especially the sitting practice, like sitting quietly with your eyes closed, and then that perspective of the empty, insubstantial nature of I, me, and mine, or the suchness of the present moment, that can be very, very apparent. Then the bell rings, and then you get up and walk out, or it's time to do something else. And so then the person comes back into being, or like I was talking about with the question I think yesterday evening, where Roman was asking about the sense of I, and how I was saying how you can have a nap and wake up and you don't know what you don't know, not only where you are, but you don't know what you are, and the person has to reassemble, and noticing those kind of things. So that for many years, when I lived here at Amaravati during this period, 85 to 95, I was often involved in a lot of the sort of administration and organizing sort of responsible activities in the community. And so that I was often like the work monk or the guest monk, or involved in work parties and such like. And so the days were usually very, very full of activities and people and engagement of one kind or another. And so this was before the temple existed, so that we would either use the sala as our meditation hall, or sometimes the retreat center shrine room. The old school gymnasium used to be on this site, so in the summertime we used to use that as a meditation hall. So wherever we would have particularly the morning sitting, often what I would do would be to, during the morning sitting, would be to consciously let the mind be as empty as possible, just to not be, feeding or say, establishing any kind of sense of self or things I've got to do, or the kind of resonances of relationships with other people in the monastery, like got to work with this person, or difficulty with that person, or enjoy being with that person. That's kind of letting go of all of the people and things, letting the mind be as empty as possible, and to be using a lot of the listening to the inner sound, the nada sound, and letting the mind be as appreciative of the suchness of Dhamma. And then ding, Luang Por would ring the bell, and then I would consciously say, welcome in the day. Okay, let the day begin. And so that there was a conscious recollection of the background or the underpinning of Dhamma, and then ding, the bell goes, and then I would usually be going straight to the office, and this was also before emails existed. So taking care of the pile of paperwork and correspondence and such like that needed to be looked after, and so then I would just sort of let the day begin, and so. I would just go with the flow of the day. I wouldn't be sort of, in a sense, trying to be mindful or doing everything in a particularly deliberate way. Or if I was in a meeting or having a discussion, I wouldn't be thinking, "Oh, I'm in a discussion. I should be mindful of what I'm saying, or I should be." So I found that if I was trying to sort of quote unquote be mindful or be detached or practice non-attachment, I would often sort of be out of sync with things. I would sort of not be paying attention to what somebody was saying, and have to say, "Could you say that again?" or trip over my own feet. So that sense of deliberately trying to be mindful or unattached, I found it made things more out of sync and more stressful. So what I would do, in a way, it's related to this bracketing, as I understand you describing it. I would just let myself attune to what was needed during the course of the day, without trying to establish any sort of conscious non-attachment. Just do what needed to be done, say what needed to be said, just responding as fully to the needs of each moment as the day took shape. And then at the end of the day, then after because usually during the evening sitting, there'd still be a lot of rattling around of the conversations and activities, and my practice wasn't strong enough to be able to sort of let go of everything right at the evening sitting. And often Luang Por would give Dhamma talks in the evening as well. So, but it would be when I got back to my room. There weren't really any kutis here in those days, so all of us were in rooms in the vihara. So I get back to my room, and I made a resolution that I would stay awake, I would stay up meditating until my mind had let go of everything related to the day. I would just, and sometimes it took a long, sometimes they were very late evenings, but I would stay with it. And again, I'd use listening to the nada sound and just being alone in my room, and just stay with it until all of the resonances of the day had faded, and there was just that sort of the stillness, the darkness, and the silence, the ringing silence of the nada, and that would be like the closing bracket, like and then that way of holding the day, so that in a sense you're putting the mask on and sort of doing the performance during the day, but you're both consciously putting the mask on and then consciously taking it off, so that the mind is in a way keeping everything in the context, is remembering that this is a performance. this is a kind of a human doing. This is what's happening. And so, and it was interesting that by not sort of consciously trying to be unattached or trying to reflect on not self during the course of a telephone conversation or a business meeting or a building task, because in those days we had a lot of building work around the monastery, insulating all the buildings and such like. So it actually made the conversations and the work I was doing much more fluid, and less stressful. And then that way of bracketing the day with sort of remembering the space before, the space after, there was a way that I found that something like a kind of background program on a computer, that it's there in the background, that the mind is unconsciously recollecting all of this is just happening in the space of the mind. Don't be fooled. Don't get lost. And that. That was I found a very helpful way to operate, and so oftentimes when people are talking about, I find it really hard to be mindful with my family, or I find it hard to be mindful in the workplace, or I find it hard to be mindful in the kitchen, and that it's a sort of manner in which people are picking up the idea of mindfulness, or trying to be mindful, or trying to be unattached, or trying to remember not self while I'm patching up my child who's got a scraped knee. How do I contemplate anatta when my child is in tears, Ajahn? They say, well, the best thing is to do is not to be thinking about it and just take care of the kid. To do what you can to look after them. So that I don't know if that's exactly the same as that Christian reference to it, but I found that a very helpful practice, just to bracket the day. And so that there's something that's recollecting. Is all of this is in the context of stillness, silence, spaciousness, even with a lot of activity and engagement going on, and that it really was instrumental in being able to live comfortably here, and so that I never found living in Amaravati very stressful or burdensome or busy, really, because in a sense, if you have that background recollection of sort of stillness, spaciousness, silence that is uninterruptible, so there in the background of your being, as it were, then it changes the way the mind holds all the activity and movement and brightness and noisiness of a day. That you're not trying to get away from the noise and activity in order to be in a silent place, but rather there's something that's remembering the silence, or is keeping it in the context of the inner silence, even as all the noise and activity is going on. Does that make sense? Evgenia, you were going to ask something? There's a microphone there.
Slightly different question about the feelings. I was wondering if we can kind of generalize all the feelings that we have to. I was reading, I don't remember somewhere, that Buddha before enlightenment he had qualities of kind of disappointment with.
Quality of what?
Not disappointment, but that you couldn't find satisfaction in any worldly things, and kind of urge for liberation, for something beyond. So, could we generalize the feeling that we basically everything that we look in the relationship, in activities, that we all looking for this something permanent, something beyond, and feeling disappointment in the end, and usually jump for something else. So underneath all the worldly feelings, could it be this kind of urge for enlightenment, for fulfillment, for kind of higher goal, just looking in the wrong place, that basically this strong feeling stays there until you will realize that is this there are some feeling that kind of drags you along the way until you will find solution, the final one.
If I understand what you're asking, I'd say, yeah, it's the reflection that the Buddha had was when he was living in the palace was, I find that I'm subject to aging, to sickness, to defilement, and to death. Why do I also chase after other things that are similarly subject to aging and sickness and defilement and to death? Why not instead, why shouldn't I pursue that which is unaging, unailing, undying, the deathless? So that was a sort of inner reflection that he had, that it was disappointing that living in the household life, the palace life, that there was a lack of satisfaction in that, because he could see that there was this limited quality of everything that he was pursuing in terms of, say, political power or physical beauty or the relationships and friendship and so on. That he could see that it was all limited and subject to decay, and so then the initiative for him to leave the palace and take up the spiritual life was that sense of, why don't I seek after what is unaging, unailing, undying, the deathless, that which is say, not subject to those qualities of impermanence and dissatisfaction. And so that I'm not sure if I heard everything that you were asking clearly, but it's often the case that when you enter upon that kind of quest or that search, why don't I seek after the unaging, the unailing, the deathless? That once you it makes it in a way clearer that the things that you habitually used to chase after and find satisfaction in, they really don't satisfy. You can't. It's more difficult to get fooled by that. It just the glamour. It wears off, the appeal wears off, and so that where you might have been able to find some kind of degree of satisfaction and comfort or fulfillment in some worldly things, it just doesn't work anymore. And so there was I think it was Suzuki Roshi, who was a Zen teacher. When people came to him and asked to be his student or asked to train with him, he said, well, be very careful before you ask to get on this train, because you won't be able to get off again. And that's in many spiritual traditions. I've heard other Buddhist teachers and Christian teachers and make the same kind of comment, is that once you've sort of bought your ticket, as it were, and you've really started to look at the quality of spiritual development and to follow that, it kind of ruins you for the world, as they say. Which is very irritating and disappointing for our worldly habits. But in a way, it's part of the chemistry, and also in terms of the spiritual aspect of our nature. There's something that's very freeing and very relieving. Like, I don't have to chase after that anymore. What a relief! And that there's a quality of unburdening. So when I first arrived in the monastery in Thailand, that was one of the strongest feelings that I had of coming into the monastery was, and just even for the first few days, just sort of taking it up in a very, very experimental way. There's this massive sense of relief of like, all those things I don't have to chase after or worry about or be concerned about. Shaving my hair, I was very attached to my hair. I had ringlets. I had a kind of thick bush of ringlety hair that I was very proud of, and but it was just so great to be able to shave it off and just drop it into the forest. It was like, don't have to think about my hair anymore, and so that kind of mixture, it's a sort of bittersweet mixture of I can't really be satisfied, or that those kind of things that used to please me, this doesn't work anymore. So recognizing the worldly conditioning is like, oh no, I was enjoying that, or that was precious, and so that they're acknowledging that sense of loss to our sort of worldly habits, a sort of childlike mind that found great satisfaction in those things. There is a bitterness there. There's a feeling of loss, but there's also that sweetness of, how delightful not to be, say, limited or depending on those things that were often so disappointing and so difficult to get or to maintain, or the mind could create so much worry about. So I'm not sure if that was all of what you were asking.
Yes, I think so. So yes, it's also like later on you also have this feeling that that's not it, and sometimes it could be difficult to find the way to make the next step forward, and you kind of losing your way a little bit, but there is still kind of strong feeling that you're still like looking for one how to make the next step. So more about like feeling tone of it, that's something kind of underneath your daily activities, that's always in the background, that you need to find the way to make the next step forward.
Yeah, good question. That's a very, very common part of spiritual practice. Luang Por when he talks about his own life as a young monk, for a long time he had this mental image of trying to cross a bridge, and then he would get a certain distance across the bridge, and then the bridge just stopped. And there was this feeling of I can get so far, but I can't get any further. And I'm not absolutely sure, but from reading his talks and interviews and dialogues that he had, it seems like he had that for several years, like 2 or 3 years. He was getting the same kind of mental image that he knew there was further to go, and that he really wanted to go, but there was this. I'm crossing the bridge, but the bridge runs out. The bridge gets halfway across the river, and then there's no more bridge, and that's how it took shape in his mind. And that, and when he went to ask one or two of the forest ajahns that he was able to meet during that time, then that's what they said. Well, there's this key that you're keen to practice, but there's this. There are the obstructions that you're experiencing, or that certain things the mind is attached to, and just the mind hasn't say developed the qualities to find a way forward, and that so just be patient, keep working at it, and then I would say that one of the key things. That influence that, or is most important, is our spiritual friends, the Kalyanamitta, and that because living in a community, it has its challenges and difficulties, but one of its great blessings is that you have this sense of support, being around like-minded people, so that you're in a really a helpful environment. But when you do run up against those barriers and the sense of this isn't really working, or I'm really stuck on this, or I know I want to get beyond this, but try this, try that, try this, try that. Yeah, it seems to be always an obstacle there. The presence of spiritual friends and a supportive environment is so helpful to sustain that, rather than just thinking, oh, I'll just bail out, give up, and go in a totally different direction. That our spiritual companions, and I feel that's one of the reasons why the Buddha said that to Ananda, that spiritual friendship is not half of the holy life, it's the whole of the holy life. Because it's that, and I've certainly experienced that so much, to a huge extent over the years, that it's being in the company of like-minded people who have similar aspirations, similar commitments, similar focus. That's been immeasurably helpful. I wouldn't, and I've often said how I don't think I would have had any any hope, any kind of a prayer of doing this on my own, if I tried to sort of live a spiritual life and practice meditation and as a individual layperson, I wouldn't have had a prayer, quite honestly. And that living in community and having a group of like-minded people, not that you understand everybody or get on with everybody all the time, it's not sort of all hearts and flowers, as they say, as I'm sure you know, but that sense of a shared value system, a shared commitment to discipline, a shared commitment to say spiritual inquiry, that those are incredibly important. And so that, because not to be too depressing, but those kind of blockages or feeling that that there's something that you're not seeing and you can't let go of, that can go on for years and years and years, like Luang Por Sumedho and his bridge experience. It can go on for years and years. So we need ridiculous amounts of patience. But our spiritual friends, our companions in the holy life, that's what helps that sense of faith and commitment and resolution to be sustained. It's one of the most important aspects of that. So that it's that quiet presence of your spiritual companions, the like-minded people around us, that helps us to stay focused on that and to do the work that's necessary for those obstacles to be finally transcended. Sister Tanavijaya. Yeah.
I'll get on to my pet topic of spiritual bypassing.
Spiritual
bypassing.
Spiritual bypassing. Mm.
When you were talking about non-self and exercising, challenging all the assumptions and perceptions and everything, and having lived in what I heard you describe as a spiritual bypass central in California, wouldn't you say that in this day and age, and with Western conditioning and a sort of disembodied existence, and everything, that somebody new coming to the practice can really grasp it really wrongly, because non-self is a really high spiritual teaching, and if your self has a lot of pain, it's just a very easy get out of just intellectually disowning all that pain. So I'm just wondering whether there are maybe suggestions or practices that should go hand in hand with that, to keep it in balance, so that there isn't a wrong understanding that this just can't be done intellectually. This can't be just, if I have no self, I have no pain. And I don't know how it was taught in California, if you have any reflections around that. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I feel that the approach to meditation of particularly of Luang Por Sumedho, and because he, being a Westerner and then teaching in the West for so many years, that just in a way the theme I was talking about in the latter part of the reading about that sort of mindfulness of emotional states, that I feel that's a really helpful way of not getting caught in that spiritual bypassing, and that because often that it's a sort of subtle kind of vibhava tanha, where the I would say that's the way the bypassing is achieved, is that not me, not mine, let go. I'm letting go of it, but it's not really being let go of. It's actually some sophisticated annihilation, or just walling things off, and so I felt that Luang Por Sumedho's approach and how he would go into like that kind of a practice of deliberately bringing up emotional states. And exploring them to get to know them, and so it's really by in a sense psychologically owning those states. Here is jealousy. It feels like this. I've got a strong habit of experiencing jealousy, and he uses that as an example very often himself. Or I've got a lot of anger, or a lot of lust, or a lot of anxiety. That whole approach, and then. The readiness to see that's not just a preparatory practice or something that's sort of necessary to do so that you can meditate, but that being very much an embodiment of the practice. That right there, you're feeling the experience of jealousy or anger or grief. You're fully attentive to it, but you're not creating suffering around it. I feel that's avoiding the bypass. You're going straight through downtown. You're right in the midst of your conditioning as a human being, and so I feel that particularly Luang Por Sumedho, because of teaching Westerners in a Western environment, it's an area that Luang Por Chad didn't spell out so much, at least in my understanding or my experience. And knowing a lot of his teachings have been translated, it's really that area of Luang Por Sumedho's teaching and his whole approach is so helpful to prevent that, and also like in that series of winter retreats we had in the late 80s, 88, 89, 90, when he saw that people were sort of sunbathing, like kind of. We got that sense that people were just enjoying the kind of internal day at the beach. Just the bright mind, not many thoughts. Everything is sabai and easeful, and haven't got to do too much work around the monastery and engage with people, and that sense of just taking refuge in quietness and brightness and wholesome mind states, a sort of internal sunbathing, I would call it. That he would make it really clear that don't do that. Stop just investing and taking refuge in those sort of bright, clear states, but put the mind to work. And so he would often encourage a lot of the reflections on dependent origination during those years, and so that that kind of bypassing, whereby you can essentially make a comfortable internal space and just go sit in it, and there's not an acknowledgement of a lot of conditioning and self-centered habits. They're sort of in abeyance, they're dormant, they're sort of they're not being sort of allowed to operate or to get the attention. And so he was very active in telling us to don't do that. Just stop being peaceful, wake up. And I remember one time one of the Sangha members. And he was sort of talking on this in this way, and they said, "But Luang Por, what should we do if we're not supposed to meditate and be peaceful? What are we supposed to do?" He said, and I think he said, "Just be awake. Just wake up." And so it could be a bit confusing sometimes. Like, don't stop meditating. Stop. You're meditating. I can tell. Stop it. He could kind of riff on these themes. It could be hilariously funny sometimes, but he also meant it. He was absolutely serious and meant it. because it's exactly that sort of forming the bypass, and I feel that that readiness to acknowledge and know your own conditioning, your own emotional states, again without analyzing it or getting too attached to it. And I think that's the flip side of spiritual bypassing is that people tend to then would certainly in the States, in California, would almost always be in psychotherapy of some kind, but then things are then being sort of bypassed in the meditation hall and then totally identified with in the therapist's office. And the middle way, I would say, is that and my experience of the teaching and the practice is that when those qualities are really met and received, you are your own therapist. You're getting to know your own psychological makeup, but also not adding anything to it, not creating a self around it. Like when Luang Por Sumedho's mother died, he was scheduled to give a 10-day retreat in California, and he'd been down to see his mother and his sister and brother-in-law. His father had died about 6 months before. He went to see his mother and stayed with her, and she saw him off at the airport. And then that night she died, or early the next morning. So she sort of went to the airport with his sister, waved goodbye, and then she'd had a bit of a cold, a bit of a fever, and his sister Virginia took her insisted she go to hospital, and she said, I'm fine, I don't need to go to hospital. It's just a bit of a bug. But she spent one night in hospital, and then, according to the hospital staff, she woke up in the morning. The nurse brought her a cup of tea at 6 a.m. She apparently picked up the teacup, took a sip of tea, put it down, coughed once, and died. So then we got the message from his sister that his mother had just passed away, and he'd arrived. So they were down in San Diego, down near the Mexican border, and he'd flown up to San Francisco. So we had to find him in San Francisco and tell him, Luang Por, your mother just died, which was not easy to do. And so he was very close, had a very deep and close relationship with his mother. And so suddenly, we had to give him the news. His mother had just died, and it was the day that this 10-day retreat was due to begin. And so according to Luang Por, so the person who drove him up to the retreat, that Luang Por just sat in the car, just pouring with tears the whole of the way up to the retreat. And the driver, was a very funny guy, Mark Lieberman, said, I've got a stick-shift car, but Luang Por wanted to hold my hand. So it's very difficult driving a stick-shift car with one hand. But Ajahn Sumedho wanted to hold my hand, so I wasn't going to say no, So he was very funny about it. But so then Luang Por led this retreat in this sort of the thick of this sort of state of grief, having lost his mother. Then he had to go down to San Diego for her funeral halfway through the retreat, and then come back and continue it. And so that I don't know what recordings were ever made from that, but the people who were on that retreat said it was a lot about what Luang Por was experiencing, and then dealing with that, the painfulness of that loss, but then holding it and working with it in the context of Dhamma. And it was a very, very powerful teaching, a very powerful retreat for everyone. Also seeing how vulnerable Luang Por could be, and how totally at ease he was with being vulnerable. And not thinking, I'm the great enlightened master, I have to be a Buddhist teacher, I should be beyond all this. And like not a shred of that. He was very, he was like so completely human, but yet enabled people to see that which was transcendent, by fully acknowledging those states and what the grief and sense of sadness that he was experiencing. So it was very clear, this is not a bypass. To me, that's it. And I think that was a really. I wasn't there for that particular retreat. That was before I ever went to the States with him. But I feel that was a really good sort of a living example of how to practice, and it was a great gift for the people there to see how spirituality, meditation, peace is not a matter of getting away from your family story or your emotional states or your psychological makeup, but it's sort of going through it, receiving it completely. That's how the heart is able to transcend that. But I see the clock has gone round. It's 11 minutes past 7 now. Somehow the hour has flown by again, so I'll leave it there for this evening.